If last elections were indication of polarization to the EFF and some sentiments to the right, it's totally gone now off the chart left and right. MK, ANC, EFF, PA are no doubt radical parties. They are a radical entity with a radical philosophy of national, socialistic, and may I call an overextension of capitalized ideology. No matter how you argue, and no matter how you're trying to paint this zebra another color, it's coming back black and white. We are now in a phase of a...
So many researchers have actually earlier on termed South Africa as a dictatorial democracy. So it's a contradiction in a way that South Africa has been practicing since 1994 a democratic dictatorship. In other words, it's a kind of democracy that maintains one particular form or set or structure of power and policy and party while driving a democratic system of governance, okay? But here in this video, Neil de Beer speaks about how, because of the way the results of the current election count is going on at the moment, South Africa seems to be transiting into more of a separatist state, okay? In this really interesting interview he has on Biznews, he actually describes that. So let's hear his analysis, Neil de Beer's analysis on what the future holds for the South African state, and I'll be back for some really interesting analysis.
The South African political era has now moved into something called a radical and separatist state. I'll say it again. We will now be governed for the next 5 years by a radical and, no doubt, separatist state in Parliament. Why do I say so? It is very clear that the abundance of the electorate, and by the way, we never got to the predicted IEC 66% of voter turnout. We flattened at 58.2%. Shocking. Shocking again. We never thought we would be below 18 million. We thought we would get close to 22. This is terrible. This is again an indictment on the democracy of this country. Chris, after all my work, after all my fight, we only got 40,000 votes. But by the way, as a new party, 40,000. Where other parties, 8 of them that have been in existence for 25 years, are below us. It's not a bad one. We missed Parliament by 5%. But this is what happened to us. We waited for the influx of voters to get us those that are, can I call it, the moderate middle. So the UIM is a moderate democratic entity. It's not a radical entity. Yeah, our talk of implementation is radical, but not our party philosophy. We are a moderate democratic entity. We were totally annihilated by the fascist, radical, left and right. Totally. If last elections were indication of polarization to the EFF and some sentiments to the right, it's totally gone now off the chart left and right. MK, ANC, EFF, PA are no doubt radical parties. They are a radical entity with a radical philosophy of national, socialistic, and may I call an overextension of capitalized ideology. No matter how you argue, and no matter how you're trying to paint this zebra another color, it's coming back black and white. We are now in a phase of a radical separate state. Radical because of the parties that this electorate of this country have now sent to Parliament. Think about it. EFF, PA, MK, ANC are undoubtedly radical parties. And separatist because we went for 2 kinds of votes which is totally separating the normal citizen of this country to very clearly two ideologies now. One, tribalism. Without a doubt, the rise now of tribalism in this country has become an absolute cornerstone of the next regime of 5 years of this country, where Zulu voted Zulu, Xhosa went for Xhosa, the colored brown community divided under two segments but went for race, and that is the second matter that was apparent, the racial separatist ideology. So we have a radical separatist government now in the making. Not good. Not
Yeah,
good.
so what do you guys think? Really interesting. I think I found a really interesting report about the issue of South Africa's future. Really interesting report, I thought. So I thought I would just share. So it speaks about how South Africa's ANC is faced with a tricky dilemma which will determine the future of the country after it spectacularly lost its majority in last week's election, okay? So, having won only 40% of the vote, the ANC needs to find a coalition partner to secure a majority in the parliament, which will support its choice of president and legislative plans, unless it tries to go alone with a minority government. One option would be to strike a deal with the second biggest party, which is the center-right Democratic DA, which won 22% of the votes. However, this would be politically risky because as the DA critics accuse the ANC of trying to protect the economic privileges of the country's white minority built up during the racist system of apartheid, a change the party denies. You see, so I think this is a really interesting point because it says critics of the DA party. This is a criticism now of the DA as a party in South Africa. Critics of the DA accuse the DA, so the leader in likes of John Steenhuisen, the leaders in likes of Helen Zille, the popular Chris Pappas, who has been really popular since his campaign in KwaZulu Natal. The DA has been criticized of trying to protect the economic privileges of the country's white minority built up during the racist system of apartheid. But the DA actually denies this a lot. So this is one of the risks that might characterize the ANC DA coalition, so to speak. But it says alternatively, the ANC could also work with two radical parties. And this is where Neil de Beer comes in this video, where he speaks about how South Africa is slowly becoming a separatist state that is being characterized and dominated by tribalism and, this kind of like saviorist mentality, this kind of like messianic complex, all incubated within one personality and accruing great followership. So this is what South Africa, Neil de Beer speaks about South Africa is slowly becoming, in the likes of EFF having a messianic character that's pulling the crowds of people who believe in that messianic image, and MK's Jacob Zuma party, which actually represents also another messianic character that has a lot of backing from the Zulus in South Africa, and then also the PA, the Gayton Mackenzies, who actually speaks for the colored. So it's kind of like this is the dimension of separatism which Neil de Beer speaks about, that South Africa is becoming a really, segmented separatist state where the populace would actually be represented by messianic figures and not necessarily a form of democracy that speaks about this whole thing about government of, for, and by the people. So it's a really interesting way to really see the future of South Africa at the moment. But it speaks about how the ANC could also work with the EFF and Julius Malema's, they could work with Julius Malema's EFF and Jacob Zuma's MK party, Mkhonto we Sizwe. And that these three parties, ANC, EFF, and MK, which the DA usually speaks about a doomsday coalition, but it says that these three parties share the same constituency, the black majority, and their combined votes come to 65%. Mr. Malema has won the ANC against forming a coalition that would reinforce white supremacy and be a puppet of white imperialist agenda. The research also says that there was a clear reference to a coalition with the DA, whose policies are diametrically opposed to the ANC's policies, but they agree both on the need to uphold the constitution that South Africa adopted at the end of apartheid in 1994. So President Cyril Ramaphosa has made it clear that any coalition agreement would have to be within the framework of the current constitution. Now, one of the biggest obstacles to a deal is the DA's fierce opposition to the ANC's efforts to create a welfare state, especially a government-funded national health service. So the DA is totally against this NHI bill that was just passed by President Cyril Ramaphosa just before the elections, okay? And it says that the DA rejects that, saying it is too expensive and threatens the future of the private health sector. The DA also believes in a free market. It opposes a minimum wage and wants to reduce red tape, saying that is the best way to improve the economy and raise the living standards for all South Africans. The DA is also vehemently opposed to the ANC's BEE program, Black Economic Empowerment Policies, seeing them as discriminating against racial minorities while simply leading to the enrichment of ANC's business cronies, okay? In my last video, I spoke about the empowerment of a small black elite by the BEE policy. So in denying the allegations, the ANC has resolutely pursued these policies, arguing that they give black people a stake in the economy that they were excluded from during apartheid. ANC chairman Gwede Mantashe has gone as far as saying that the ANC's black economic empowerment policies are non-negotiable, suggesting that he has ruled out a coalition with the DA. But according to some local media, President Cyril Ramaphosa is willing to enter a coalition with the DA, believing that their policy differences could be overcome. To overcome the racial sensitivities, other parties such as the Black Inkatha IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party, and the Good Party, which draws its support primarily from the colored community, as people of mixed race in South Africa, could be included to form a government of national unity, GNU. The ANC's other option would be to form a coalition with the Umkhonto we Sizwe, the MK party by Jacob Zuma, which was the biggest winner, which was the big winner of the election by securing third spot with 15% of the vote in the first election it ever contested, since post 1994. So, but the MK is demanding a fresh poll. We know that. And it's alleging that it even got more votes, but the final result was rigged. The Electoral Commission has rejected that allegation, and the MK has yet to present any evidence for this. But this whole friction between the MK and the ANC is wider than any other party, partly because of the personal animosity between former President Jacob Zuma and President Cyril Ramaphosa, okay? Especially since Zuma was ousted, to be replaced by President Cyril Ramaphosa. So as well as demanding a new president, MK wants the constitution to be torn up so that South Africa becomes an unfettered parliamentary democracy, something that the ANC has ruled out. So the MK, in my next video, I was speaking about John Steen, describes how the MK wants to kick out the South Africa's constitution, okay? And at first glance, he says that the possibility for this coalition rules out the EFF because the EFF too is demanding a constitutional amendment so that white-owned land can be expropriated without compensation. We know that Mr. Malema was expelled from the ANC in 2012 for fomenting divisions and bringing the party into disrepute, saying that the EFF was willing to work with the ANC in a coalition nonetheless. However, the EFF's demand for land expropriation is a cardinal principle, and it would not join the government if the ANC rejects it. So we see a lot of mess, different policies, different kinds of needs and visions for South Africa, and how this would impact we'll see what kind of coalition comes around. It could be a really complex negotiation to find a workable coalition government, a government of national unity. But to continue with this anyway, it says the ANC and the EFF together have 198 seats, just short of the 201 seats needed for a parliamentary majority. So a smaller party would have to be brought in to the coalition. So this is kind of like the kingmaker, what Gaten McKenzie speaks about, the PA being the kingmaker. In other words, this smaller party would need to kind of like complete the majority that's needed to form a coalition. Or that's the situation for the ANC and the EFF. Both of them have 198 seats, so they need to pull in a smaller party to be able to form a majority. Or they could team up with the MK party, which also supports land expropriation and says that there's a need to distribute farmland on an equal basis among the farming population. But to change the constitution, a two-thirds majority is needed. And again, the ANC, the EFF, and the MK fall short of the 267 seats needed. They would have, if they all combine together in a coalition, they will have 256 seats between them. But they need 267 seats to be able to alter or change the constitution of South Africa. And so all three parties actually would fall short of changing the constitution, and that wouldn't really hold. But here it also speaks about the fact that while the ANC is opposed to constitutional amendments, it accepts that the current land ownership patterns need to be tackled. Okay, and in an interview with a former president, a close ally to President Cyril Ramaphosa, the land question was spoken as a source of national grievance. This whole thing about land, it grieves the soul of South Africa, in that words. So it also speaks about the fact that the DA strongly opposes a deal between its three rivals, so the EFF, the MK, and the ANC, saying that it would be a doomsday coalition, as I spoke about, that would turn South Africa into a Zimbabwe or Venezuela. It says that the MK speaks about the fact, the DA speaks about the fact that the doomsday coalition would plunge South Africa into ethnic and racial conflict, the likes of which the country had never witnessed before. So it speaks about that while some ANC officials hold the opposite view, that stability will be threatened if MK is excluded, given its electoral success, which has made it the largest party in KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal is South Africa's second most populous province and is often described as the economic artery of the nation because of its ports. So it's, in other words, many times I feel it's also tricky that if Chris Pappas wins the premiership of KwaZulu-Natal and this whole entrance with MK now coming with the full force of a 15% in the overall election vote, I don't know what it would look like for the DA party in KwaZulu-Natal anyway. We don't know what to say for now, but anyway, we'll keep analyzing. So it also speaks about how it is also the KwaZulu-Natal is also politically the most volatile province with a history of violence. More than 300 people died in the riots after President Zuma was sent to prison in 2021 in KwaZulu-Natal. He was convicted of contempt of court for defying an order to cooperate with an official inquiry into corruption during his 9-year presidency, which ended in 2018. So the research also speaks about how ANC leaders in Gauteng, South Africa's biggest and richest province, are also said to favor a deal with the EFF, but their hand has been considerably weakened by the fact that the two parties do not have enough seats for the parliamentary majority. And it increases a prospect for the ANC-DA coalition, especially as it is favored by the private sector as the best option to guarantee economic stability and to avoid capital flight. So in other words, the ANC and the DA coalition in that regard would be much more favored by private entrepreneurs at the moment, or the business community in South Africa, which plays a huge role in South Africa, you see. And that might be a much more favorable option to the business community to keep capital back in South Africa, to avoid a flight of capital, rather than a coalition between the ANC, the MK, and the EFF, which has been argued to threaten the flight of capital. But then some people, the EFF argues that if such a flight of capital leaves South Africa, then Russia and China would replace that, and that will kind of like influence the future of South Africa. We might be seeing the emergence of a real socialist state in Africa, you see. But anyway, we'll continue. So it also speaks about how South Africa's But it also speaks about how the ANC is also considering the option of forming a minority government while signing a confidence and supply agreement with the DA and the IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party, which has support in KwaZulu-Natal. And I think that the IFP have 17 seats. IFP has 17 seats in KZN. Okay. So it speaks about the fact that the two would vote with the ANC on crucial issues. So if this kind of coalition agreement between the ANC, the DA, and the Inkatha Freedom, the IFP, which is that small minority that was needed to pad up the ANC and the DA in order to form a majority in the parliament. So the way that would work would be that the DA and the IFP would vote with the ANC on crucial issues such as budget, while the ANC would have to constantly lobby them and other parties to support it on other legislation. Okay? So, in a way, this could help the ANC out of its dilemma at the moment of choosing a coalition partner, and it would also suit the DA, as a coalition with the ANC could cause it to lose support to parties to the right. Right? It says that this could help the ANC out of its dilemma of choosing a coalition partner, and it may also suit the DA, as a coalition with the ANC could cause it to lose support to parties to its right. However, there's a risk that the minority government could lead to political instability and transactional politics. Opposition MPs demanding or being offered bribes to back ANC-sponsored legislation, and we might see a renewed form of cronyism and nepotism in South Africa if this minority perspective, which the ANC might decide to have, comes into effect. But it's still too early to really determine what goes on. But it's really interesting, and I know that this would really be a difficult negotiations. But it's been a lot of information. What do you guys think about the coalition possibilities in South Africa? Share your thoughts in the comments.